All right, everyone. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Oops. I think training today will be pretty straightforward. I feel like a lot of you guys already have a good handle and grasp on Michigan election law training. So I think this will be really easy for you all. Um, I'm gonna ask that you save questions toward the end. Just make sure you take note of them so I can address them, and go ahead and type them in the chat whenever you have them, and I'm gonna try to address them all at the end. Just make sure everything is all good. Okay, perfect. If at any point the connection gets bad or you can't hear me or anything, just feel free to unmute yourself and let me know. I'm going to go ahead and get started. So first, I want to just say we're with the Fair Election Center. We're nonpartisan. We're not providing you guys any legal advice or anything like that in this. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm going to do my best to go through this. Yep, this is just general guidance, not an attorney-client relationship, anything like that. And then if you have questions, I would say speak directly to your local elected officials. So on the agenda for today, we have our election law, how to register, how to vote, and just basic election protection guidelines. So pretty straightforward. So I just wanted to start by saying that the Higher Education Act basically was reauthorized, and they asked that if your institution is covered by this, you need to make sure that you distribute voter registration forms widely and make them available to your students. I think generally they have to do that about 60 days in advance of the election. And now I think they used to do a paper copy. Now I'm pretty sure you all receive emails about it, and the emails have to be specifically about voter registration. So that's something your campuses most likely are doing. And then I wanted to get into some of the election law straight up. So first and foremost, you're not allowed, when registering people to vote or hosting registration drives, you're not allowed to pay someone to register to vote, or pay someone to vote in an election. You can still do activities and incentives and prizes and things like that. They just cannot be based on the condition that the person goes to register to vote, or that the person votes a certain way. So for example, you can have, if you're tabling outside somewhere, you can give out pizza or coffee or things like that just as a general attraction, but you cannot give out pizza specifically so that someone goes and votes or goes and registers to vote. So just be careful of how you are phrasing that, and be careful of how you're marketing that when you are doing those activities on campus. And so keep that in mind. The next big one is third-party voter registration. So that's if you're hosting a registration drive, you would be probably the third party that is registering someone to vote on behalf of your campus or on behalf of Campus Vote Project, etc. You're allowed to have blank copies of voter registration forms. They can be photocopied and used during drives. Just make sure if you are using paper forms that just be careful with how you're handling the data. There is no restrictions on photocopying the form to my knowledge, but make sure the voter's date of birth and signature, social security number, and all that are removed if you do make a copy of it, so that it's not like identifiable information is not out there. However, I do think most of you have taken your efforts electronic, so you most likely would not have that data anyways, but probably similar things apply. All right. In terms of ballot selfies, so I believe you are allowed to take a selfie with your filled out ballot. However, you're not supposed to do it in a vote. You're not supposed to just generally take selfies in a voting booth or within the area where other people are voting. Also, just generally don't take photos in the area where other people are voting, and then do not share photos of a voted ballot within 100 feet from a polling place, because I guess that can be considered as maybe influencing people. And so just make sure you're not doing that. I know there's a lot of excitement around voting, especially if you're a first time voter. I would just stick with the I voted stickers or something like that. Just try to keep your ballot out of there. Keep your life simple and easy. Yeah. And then going on to voter registration specifically, I just wanted to say you can vote either at your, if you don't live at home, you can vote at your like you can register to vote at the residence address at campus, or you can register at home. I recommend you registering based on where you are at the moment. So for most of you, that could be on campus. For many of you, that could be at home due to COVID and a lot of things being taken virtual. So make sure before you vote that you're registered at the correct address. And to register to vote in America, but also in Michigan specifically, you must be a US citizen. You must be 18 years or older when you go to vote. You must be a Michigan resident for at least 30 days. So this applies to maybe students who came from out of state. They need to be living in Michigan for 30 days if they register to vote in Michigan. However, given that we're mostly through the semester, if they're on campus, this shouldn't be an issue. And then you must also not be currently serving a sentence in jail or in prison. However, I think if you're awaiting trial or sentencing, you're still able to vote. And if you've completed your sentence, you're also still able to register and vote. So keep that in mind. And now I just want to go into voter registration itself. I posted these deadlines because we're well within a couple weeks away from the election. So just be really mindful. I'm going to give you guys advice going forward because I know you're all doing a lot of various civic engagement activities on campus, and you're probably all well aware of these, but just want to reiterate. In Michigan, you can vote, or you can register to vote online. You would register on michigan.gov/vote. However, if you do the online route, you need to have a Michigan's driver's license or state ID. You're actually not able to register online without it. The deadline was October 19th, so that's not applicable now, but keep that knowledge for the next election. Same thing with voting to register, or sorry, registering to vote by mail. I linked the form here. In order to fill out that form, you do need a Michigan driver's license or state ID. You would input those numbers on the form. If you don't have either of those things, you would actually have to put the last 4 digits of your social security number. If you don't have that, you can also photocopy a current and valid ID from a different state, or you can photocopy a paycheck or a utility bill or bank statement, basically anything that can validate your address. We generally recommend people mail this form by October 19th at the absolute latest, just to make sure it gets on time, gets in on time. However, that date has passed, so we're not encouraging people to do this at all. Again, you can save that for future elections. And then Michigan does have same day registration. So what that means is you can actually register in person until 8 p.m. on election day. However, obviously we advise you to go before then. And then if you do this, you actually have to do it at your local clerk's office. Again, you can find your clerk's office address and hours on michigan.gov/vote. So there's different, now that we're post October 19th, this is what I'm kind of recommending that you all do. If it's your first time registering, definitely go to your local clerk's office, check their hours. The deadline for voting is 8 p.m. on November 3rd, so make sure that you're registered well before then. You can find your local clerk at that link. And then there's various pieces of ID that you can bring with you to sort of validate your address. So it'd be your Michigan driver's license or state ID, current or utility bill, bank statement, paycheck, other government checks or documents. Basically anything that can really validate what your address is. And then if you're already registered and maybe you've changed your address, you've gone back home since then, you can actually do that. Usually I think you can do these online as well, but however, since we're so close to the election, we're recommending that you go in person, again, at your local clerk's office. And if you're unable to do that and you still have your previous ID, because in Michigan, if you change your voting address, it automatically changes your driver's license and vice versa. So you can actually possibly still vote at your previous location for the last time. You may request an absentee ballot from your old city clerk as well. So those are just some things to keep in mind. And then I want to go into methods of voting. So you can do it absentee by mail or through drop off, or you can do it in person early or in person on election day. Um, and some of these are more viable than others given how close we are to the election. So I'll explain that further. So Michigan does have a no excuse absentee ballot application, meaning that you don't need to provide the Secretary of State with a reason about why you're voting absentee, which was something I think they had in the past. So you don't have to do that anymore, which is great. So in order to request an absentee ballot, you can pretty much do it 3 ways: through an online application, by dropping off or emailing your application, or by mailing in your application. So in order to get your absentee ballot on time, the clerk's offices are requesting that the request is in by 5 p.m. on October 30th, which is the Friday before election day. So in order to get an absentee ballot, you can request one online, and that's on michigan.gov/vote. It's probably one of the easier ways. You can also request an absentee ballot to be sent to you by mail from your clerk's office, either by printing out the application linked below and either dropping that off at your clerk's office or emailing it to your clerk's office. You're actually able to check what your clerk's office is doing if you find your local clerk at michigan.gov/vote. So you can go ahead and do that to see if they have an email address that you can send it to, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally, you can request an absentee ballot by sending your application through mail. However, we know USPS is having a lot of delays this year, so probably not going to recommend that step anymore, just because there's no guarantee that it'll reach your clerk's office by 5 p.m. on October 30th. So we're either requesting that you do it online, email your application, or drop your application off directly, because there's still time to receive an application. But I'll get into that in just a second. But there's not much time to send an application by mail. So once you have your absentee ballot, you can either, again, send it by mail or drop it off. However, I'm getting ahead of myself. But once you receive your ballot, you basically just fill it out. You put it in the manila secrecy envelope. Then you put that into your return envelope and make sure you sign the back. Your signature must match the signature that they have on file. So if you have a driver's license, you can probably check and see if your signature matches closely enough. I believe the clerk's offices do have to inform you within 48 hours of receiving your ballot if it doesn't match, but better to check if you can before sending it out. So the ballots have to be sent back with the appropriate postage, which in Michigan is about 2 stamps, to the clerk's office, and their address is on the return envelope. However, the deadline for that was October 19th, so we're not recommending people do that anymore because there is no guarantee that it's going to arrive to the clerk's office by November 3rd. So the alternatives that we're proposing is that ballots to be dropped off at your clerk's office or your designated drop box. So just be sure when you're doing this that you're registered in the correct area, because you do have to drop off your ballot at your designated drop box. You can't drop it off to any other clerk's office. It has to be the one that's designated for you. And when returning your ballot, only you, a mail carrier, a family member, someone residing in your household, or an election official are able to return the ballot for you. So if you live with your sister, it's totally okay to take your ballot and drop hers off too. But you can't just give it to a random friend to pick it up and drop it off. It has to be you, a mail carrier, a family member, a person residing in your household, or an election official in the cases where people have disabilities and are unable to return it themselves. And then once you return your ballot, definitely track your ballot. You're able to do so at michigan.gov/vote. It'll just ask you to put in like your name, your zip code, that kind of stuff, and it should tell you on the side if it's been received. And since we're cutting it close to election day, a lot of people are now going to be opting to vote early in person or in person on election day. So be sure to make sure that you find your polling location. Again, michigan.gov/vote. That website literally has everything you need to know for the election. And then early voting actually opens 40 days prior to elections. So that was on September 24th. So early voting has been going on since September 24th, and you can go from now till November 2nd if you want to go early. Just do make sure you check your clerk's hours to make sure that you're going during their working hours. Some of them close early at like 4 o'clock, so definitely check before you go, so you don't end up getting stuck in a long line on election day potentially. Or if you vote on election day, you have until 8 p.m. to be in line. So if you're in line at 8 p.m. and it's a huge line, you're still eligible to vote. But if you come into line after 8 p.m., they probably won't let you. Make sure you bring a valid ID, and then make sure you're registered to vote at that location on election day, and make sure you know you're going to the correct polling location. And if you vote early, you're not going to go to your polling location, you're going to go to your clerk's office. So just make sure you're going to the correct area before you go out and vote. That's why it's good to have a plan in advance, just so you guys all know what you're doing. And then finally, ID requirements on election day. So basically, there's a lot of things that can happen here. You can use your Michigan driver's license, your state ID. If you don't have one for Michigan, you can actually use a valid driver's license or state ID from another state, a federal or state issued photo ID, student ID with photo from an accredited institution. So you guys can use your student IDs since you're all college university students. A US passport, a tribal identification card with photo, a military ID card with photo. And if you have no if you have no identification, you may still vote by signing an affidavit that basically says, I declare that I am Hera and I'm going to be voting. So you can still vote, but make sure you have your ID with you, just to make your life a lot easier and to prevent any issues or delays at the polls. And then finally, a lot of people are concerned about voter intimidation happening this year and every other year, I guess. So I just wanted to give you like a general overview of what some types of voter intimidation do look like. So, if you're following voters, if you're invading their space, if you're loitering near them while carrying firearms, even law enforcement that are off, even if they're off duty, that are just loitering around and watching people, can also be considered voter intimidation. If someone's harassing you or asking if you're qualified to vote, or saying you need to speak English to vote, or just giving you false information or things like that, that's also voter intimidation. Anyone suggesting possible future violence or legal action based on your presence at the polls, falsely presenting oneself as an election official, et cetera, et cetera. There's a bunch of ways voter intimidation sort of manifests itself, but there are a few things you can do and keep in mind. So you can report intimidation to your local polling place, your local poll workers, your county clerks, your state officials, your election commissioners and supervisors. And you can also call the election protection hotline at 866-OUR-VOTE. They have a few different numbers for people who are fluent in other languages. So they have one for Spanish, one for various Asian languages, and one for Arabic. You can also call the U.S. Department of Justice Voting Rights, and their number's also on here. And then if you do encounter voter intimidation, just make sure you take note of details like who was involved, what they were doing, where you were, what time it was, any identifiable information, and notify your election officials at that polling place. And if you're feeling nervous or scared, it's always great to bring a friend to the polls, or there's still time to vote early. If you want to kind of sidetrack all that, you can always go and vote early, and there's likely going to be less people at your clerk's office. Other than that, just general COVID tips. You guys are already all pros at this. I know you are, but the bottom line is we're telling people to request an absentee ballot and either drop it off at your designated drop box, or vote early in person, just to avoid long lines, excessive exposure to others. Make sure you wear a mask when you go out, social distance, and all that good stuff. And then I've also included some resources here from CVP, our Michigan Toolkit, our Michigan Students Vote Calendar, the Michigan Secretary of State student voting website, some resources from Students Learn, Students Vote Coalition and Campus, and SEEP. They have like various nonpartisan voter guides and things like that. So definitely check those out. And then now I'm gonna sort of share the floor with you guys if you have any questions at all. So I think Raymond was asking the 866 hour vote. That's, I think, a national hotline, I want to say. Yes, I will definitely make the PowerPoint available to you all. I'll also send out the recording of this so you guys can all have it and refer back to it. Did you guys have any other questions with respect to like absentee ballots or any of that stuff, or what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do, any activities you're doing on campus? Cool. And then I also wanted to add, if you go on michigan.gov/vote, for those of you who don't have your ballot yet, or for those of you who are voting in person, you can actually check out sample ballots on that website. I'm sure a lot of you guys already know this because you're pros at the work you're doing now, but you can check out your sample ballots, check some of the issues on the ballot, some of your candidates, and you can refer to some of the nonpartisan voting guides that I linked in these slides. So another question, we can't wear political clothing if we're voting in person. Yeah, so I think you're not allowed having like buttons and stuff, or like shirts that say specific political things like that I guess represent specific political candidates. Just because you're within 100 feet of your polling location, you're not allowed to be sort of impacting the vote anyway like that. So just be careful and mindful of that. But yeah, that's a great question. You guys have any other questions? John, I wanted to give the floor to you for a second. Do you have anything else that you want to add, or any resources that you would like to share with the fellows?
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for inviting me to join. And this has been great. This like a comprehensive, totally detailed, summary of all Michigan voting laws and requirements. What I encourage all folks to say, to do, in the coming days, including on election day, it's like anything else. If you see something, say something, right? Report it to Campus Vote Project, report it to us. I should have started by just introducing myself. Like Hero was saying, my name's John. I'm senior counsel at Fair Election Center. Largely what my job is suing state election officials, to ensure compliance with federal and state laws. That can be anything from, the Constitution to a voter intimidation statute. So I just encourage everyone, if something seems weird or out of the ordinary or potentially illegal, trust your instinct. It probably is, or it's at least worth running up the up the chain to see if there's a problem. So yeah, I think fortunately you have great leadership now, I think, in election administration in the state, but the laws are not perfect, and of course there are bad actors out there. So please, keep the lines of communication open. Talk to someone, talk to us if you see problems out there. And thanks again for inviting me to participate and listen in.
Thank you so much, John, for attending and providing that advice to our fellows. I also wanted to add, Sumaya and I will be available during election day. So if you guys have any questions, you can feel free to email us or message us on Slack if you need to reach us quickly, just so we can help you guys out and provide any answers to any questions you may have. Also, if any of you are impacted by the stay-at-home order at University of Michigan or any other campuses between now and election day, just give us a heads up. We're going to discuss this hopefully at our fellow meeting on Friday, and we are working with our partners to sort of gather more information around that and sort of give you guys the tools on how to work around that. But if there are no more questions, you are free to sign off and have a good day, everyone.
Thanks very much. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. I'm gonna take a nap, I think.